Shana Tova. Good Yantiv. Can you hear me in the back? This summer, August 2nd, August 3rd actually, I woke up from a dream that I had the night after my anniversary with my wife Rachel. And so I had this dream that I'd been invited to an ultra-Orthodox wedding, and I arrived late for who knows what reason. I'd got involved in this or that. And I came into a sea of black hats and people dressed in black and white, very religious Jews, and everyone was busying themselves this way and that way, and I was trying to find my way in this huge crowd of people. And I saw my father, who's a rabbi. He said to me, I told him you were going to be giving a Dvar Torah, a sermon in just a few minutes, right after the Mincha service. And suddenly, my mind in this dream or nightmare went into overdrive. So what could I do? What could I tell them about? Well, how could I inspire a groom and bride on this most important day? What could I say? I was going to speak to after an afternoon service, and so what would be my words? What could I share them on this important moment in their lives? And so in the dream, I began to weave together a sermon, the dreams of rabbis. But I started to put together a sermon. I was thinking about the afternoon prayer service and how it replaced the afternoon animal sacrifice in the temple in Jerusalem, as all of our prayer services have replaced the appointed times for sacrifices in the temple. Right? Without a temple, the rabbis kept the same rhythm of offerings, but they made them prayer, they made them offerings of the heart. And so in the dream, what I suddenly came to, what I really wanted to say, what was deepest in my heart, was I wanted to speak about the beauty of the sacrifices that we make in our lives for the sake of love. The beauty of the sacrifices we make in our life for the sake of love. And this is what I wanted to share with this couple on this important day. What is a sacrifice? Well, the word in Hebrew for sacrifice, korban, is very close to the word for close, karov. When we sacrifice something for the sake of a higher purpose, it just lifts us up. Be more connected with who we are, how we really want to walk in this world, to the divine, of course. And right, in ancient times, they would bring these animal sacrifices to the temple, and that was their means for everyday men and women to experience the God of Israel. Right? They believed that by giving this sacrifice, they were opening up something tangible, a connection, a pathway that would evoke a response. And this was an ancient belief. And for us too, sacrifice opens up something. Giving of our time, giving of our heart, giving of our soul. And it's an opportunity that actually comes to us on a very daily basis. So I was going to tell the parties in this dream of mine, that if you really want to share in the partnership of a real marriage, there's some give and take that has to happen. And then really you have to give your self-centeredness. You have to give some of your selfishness. You have to give some of what you took for granted, which was that you were the center of everything. And of course it becomes more so once you have a family. And we have all kinds of visions when we're young of what love is about. Then when you get to the tachlis, to what it's really about day to day, in our closest relationships, it's really about giving selflessly. In the immortal words of Golda and Fiddler on the Roof, I wash your clothes, I clean your house, I milk the cow. If that's not love, what is? And so the ancients in the temple, at the time of the temple, they were giving over something real and precious, an animal that they'd fed and raised and nurtured, and they were giving it to something intangible and visible. They were giving it to God. And really in our relationships, it's not so very different. We do so many things. We do this, and we do that, we organize this. And yes, sometimes it's seen and there's something tangible we get back. And other times what we get back is completely invisible or intangible, a sense of duty, of love, a sacrifice that we've done of the heart. To put someone else before our needs, often they don't even know it. And yet it happens every day. And I remember when I was in yeshiva, just before rabbinical school, and I decided one day I'm going to read the Torah cover to cover. And I remember being so surprised by the overall effect. There's really not that much what we would call just wisdom about life or teachings even about how to live holy lives. Of course, there are commandments that apply or do not seem to apply to our modern times. But really what it's about is relationships between people, especially between families. As are all of these readings that are really what accompany us through the high holidays. They're about families. Abraham, what do we read about every year? Abraham putting others before himself and ultimately putting the universal consciousness above all else. So Abraham's journey to selflessness doesn't begin that way, because before our stories, when you're in the book of Genesis, we first encounter Abraham, and his name isn't Abraham, it's Abram, and he has to go down to Egypt because there's a famine in Canaan. And his wife is beautiful, and he's worried that people are going to kill him because it's a hostile place and take his wife. So he pretends that she's his sister, leaving her, so to speak, up for grabs. So the Torah is not too pleased about Abraham's thinking of himself before his wife, and he learns a lesson. And so decades later, when we get to our Torah reading, it's all about Abraham having to give. Ishmael is sent away because of that story we read this morning. Sarah has this inspired warning, and she's really worried that Ishmael would take the inheritance from Isaac, and God backs her up. But Abraham has to give up his firstborn son and send him away. Unfathomable. And then tomorrow's reading, he's asked to make an even bigger sacrifice, to go against all of his beliefs, and to offer Isaac as a burnt offering up. In the end, he doesn't have to, but his willingness is what God was looking for. All the things that we do for love in this broken world of ours, as we experience almost every day. And the term in our tradition for that kind of act of love, pure act of loving kindness that a person can do for another, we talk about often at Jewish funerals, chesed ve'emet, true kindness, or literally the truest kindness. And traditionally, why at funerals? Because it's giving a relative the burial that they asked for, honoring their wishes. Because it's a pure act, because there's no chance of you getting anything in return for doing that for them. Right? Usually in life, our tradition is wise. Everything we do is maybe to receive something back. We keep a little mental log. We try and balance it all. That's just how we act, even in small ways. But in this case, there's nothing that come back to us. But the truth is, I have never been satisfied with this teaching. Because yes, it's true that on one hand, when your relative has passed away, it's not a two-way street. It can only be a one-way street. They can never reciprocate. And maybe all other acts are two-way. But yet another truth is that we do so many acts of loving kindness every day through our lives that are just like that. Parents for their children, spouses for their beloveds, especially end of life as caretakers. And those are also chesed shel emet. Those are also the truest loving kindness. Because mostly they go unseen and they will never be returned. They're done just for love. And what beauty that brings into our lives. I just want to take this opportunity now to recognize all of you who are in that space of caretakers this past year, for spouses, for parents, or just for children, special friends. And this is being human. This is being human. Rabbi Nachman says, doing tzedakah, charity, and love, chesed, that's what makes us human. There's a midrash in the Talmud, Sota 14a. Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina said, "What is the meaning of you shall walk after the Lord your God? Is it possible for a human being to follow the divine presence? It already says in the Torah, for you, the Lord your God is a consuming fire. How can one follow a consuming fire? Rather, the mitzvah to follow God is to emulate the attributes of the Holy One, blessed be He. Just as He clothed the naked, as it says, and the Lord God made for Adam and his wife skin garments, and He clothed them, so too He shall clothe the naked. The Holy One, blessed be He, visited the sick, as it is written, the Lord appeared to Abraham in Elonem Mamre on the third day after his circumcision. So too you should visit the sick. The Holy One, blessed be He, comforted mourners, as it is written, and it was after the death of Abraham that God blessed Isaac his son by reciting the mourners' Kaddish. So too you shall comfort mourners. The Holy One, blessed be He, buried the dead, as it is written, He buried Moses in the valley. So too you shall bury the dead. And this is what it means to emulate God. And all these endless little sacrifices and all these acts of kindness to make up our lives, that's what make us human. That's what make us divine. And that's the essence of being a human being, and it's the essence of the path of Torah as passed down over millennia. And in our lives, and all these complicated situations that arise, we sometimes feel, why are we always put into these situations that demand this of us? And the truth is, we can't always understand why it's happening to us. But no matter who we are, we have to fulfill the task that's put before us and face what life brings us. And usually, it's not always coming of some great lofty thinking. We fulfill our part because we know it's the right thing to do. It's just what's needed at that moment and the circumstances, and we make that conscious or subconscious decision. And most of us don't have to go looking for these opportunities for acts of chesed because they come to us free of charge. Right, as we see in the Abraham and Sarah stories in the Bible, and all the family troubles and relationships and everyday challenges and bringing up children and needs of aging parents and partners, friends, members of the community, life goes its merry way until suddenly you get a phone call and a crisis happens. And so this term chesed shel emet that's found in the Torah, doing truest kindness, it's made when after Joseph has worked so hard to bring the entire family down to Egypt, and his father Jacob says, well, when I pass away, I want you to take me up to Canaan to bury me. It's not as if the flights from Egypt to Canaan ran that often back then. He says, do this truest kindness to me. Do this kindness to me. Bury me in there. Suddenly you're taking care of someone in your life, or a child or a teenager in distress, or it's been 20, 30 years since they've been a teenager and they're nonetheless in distress. And so you give from where you are. You give as you can. And in those little big moments in life, the clear way, all the other stuff that usually fills our minds and hearts. And suddenly, it's the beauty of it too, we're not just worrying about what that person said about me or thinks about me or what that idiot is doing, because we're busy doing kindness. And suddenly this is what it's about. And the other stuff, who cares? It's no longer important. In the end, I'm happy to do this because I love this person. And the other plans I had in my head, even sometimes my dreams, they will happen another time, God willing. And this sacrifice brings beauty to our lives. And parents have children, and children have no idea until they themselves have children, how snacks make their way onto the table, and how ideas and behaviors get into their hearts and minds. And in my dream, I was asked to give a Dvar Torah. And I thought about giving a Dvar Torah about the sacrifices we do as a couple and as a family when we get married, because it was a service for a wedding. In the past, it was often women who had to make all these sacrifices. And it often still is women who have to make a lot of these sacrifices. And both parties need to hear about sacrifice. That's why I wanted to talk about it then. And these days, there are a lot of fathers who are also trying to rectify the balance. And the wedding is a holy partnership between two people to be there for each other and sacrifice for each other. But also, the high holidays are also considered to be a wedding between God and the Jewish people. And the Kabbalah has this whole description of God and the Jewish people in the days before Rosh Hashanah, how they come together and embrace, and it builds and builds until the climax on Yom Kippur. And all of life is a wedding, as we say, when there's give and take, and you dance and you sing and you feel that love every day. But this is not an easy year to feel the love between God and the Jewish people. It's not an easy year to feel that love. And the Jewish people did not feel much like dancing. We have so many questions. But in general, for us moderns, this is the hardest part. Where is God? What God do we believe in? And yet we still have to make sacrifices, even when we don't have the answers. And I'll be speaking about this later in the holidays. But maybe what we can say is that even when we do not understand why, we often can find the beauty in the sacrifice, and certainly in the sacrifices that we see others make. We'll be talking these holidays about the rise in anti-Semitism and those, as we heard this morning, who've been working to it. And this year, there's been a lot on my mind is all those high schoolers who suddenly found themselves that their identity as Zionists and as Jews was suddenly divisive and unloved, and even being attacked for it. During these intense years in their life where everything is in flux and they're trying to balance, as I mentioned earlier, academic and extracurricular and social and building their future, and what's supposed to be the best years of their lives, suddenly thrown into upheaval because of hatred against Israel and against Jews. And the fact that many have been called to fight this hatred and defend their ancient homeland for the love of Judaism, that's also sacrificing. That's an act of sacrifice for something greater than themselves, for the love of their people. What Alana was talking about and all her friends, what they've been going through. And all the members of our community who saw what was happening in our very neighborhoods, in our press, and our institutions, who stood up to talk about Jewish identity, to try and bring some complexity. It's not just so black and white. Even when it put them in a situation of public scrutiny or of danger. And that is sacrifice. All those we heard from this morning, Gio and Alan and everybody else in our community. And the high schoolers, they could have hidden their Jewish identity, and that would have been fine. We don't expect any more. We all have our own path to express how we feel about it all. And I've also seen a lot of people who've told me they bought a new Magen David. And when they go to a Zoom meeting, they unbutton the top button of their shirt to show their Star of David, to make sure everybody can see who they are. And people feeling, maybe sometimes even for the first time, a pride and a commitment to their Jewish self and to their community, to the Jewish people and to Israel. And that is sacrificing for a people. So I read a story last year of a marathon runner an American marathon runner, who went to run the London Marathon with an Israeli flag around her. And London, if you don't know, is probably the world center of anti-Israel sentiment. And she ran up this huge flag, but she ran past much bigger flags and anti-Israel sentiment. And afterwards, she recounted how so many people came up to her and whispered a few words in Hebrew in her ear, or someone who grabbed her and put her arm around her and sang Am Yisrael Chai as they ran past a group who were chanting anti-Israel chants. And for other people, it takes other forms. And the Torah wants us also to sacrifice for our people because it brings meaning to our lives. And that is putting an even higher form of love. Maybe also it's chesed shalamet, that truest kindness into the world. When you take the actual, we say this to the religious school students, when you take the actual center of the Torah, the very middle, you open it up, you get the holiness code. And when you get to the middle of the holiness code, what you get, love your neighbor as yourself. Because that is showing true kindness. Everybody deserves empathy in this world. But of course, we're talking about sacrifices, and Leviticus, which talks about sacrifices, through most of its pages, and what we're doing this morning also asks us to sacrifice for God. This is the great sacrifice in the most dreadful story in the Torah that we read tomorrow in Genesis, when God asked Moses to sacrifice his son Isaac as a burnt offering. What can Abraham do or say? This God he's been talking to for years and he's done already so much to follow, who miraculously gave him a son at the age of 100, says the Torah, commands him to sacrifice his only other son when he sent the other away. And so Abraham has no words. He just follows. You should come tomorrow to hear the rest of the story. It's really, the rabbis knew how to get people to come back for day 2. They gave the best dramatic reading in the Torah. In the end, God doesn't want a literal sacrifice. That's the lesson in my mind. An angel stops the act. God never asks anyone else to sacrifice their child, what is most precious. But God does want us to be willing to give beyond our needs. And what happens in that story is incomprehensible. And in that case of Abraham, it creates this impossible choice, how to choose what to do. Thank God most of us don't have to make that level of sacrifice. But the Torah does want us to open that door to sacrifice for meaning and purpose for God. Because there's a person who I love very much who recently said to me, in the moment of profound realization, in the end it all leaves. Your children leave the house, your spouse, you don't know what's going to happen to them. All of it is temporary. And so you have to sacrifice, even from the busyness of everything else, to make your time for the relationship with the eternal. And even in such a year, especially in such a year, because life is still going by, we each have to find our own path to how we make this real. It doesn't mean you have to sit down and write, this is my theology, what I believe or don't believe. As Jews, it doesn't matter what we believe, it's what we do that counts. And so try to make a little bit more space for that sacrifice to meaning in our lives, moments of giving our time and bringing ourselves closer to that truest kindness that opens up the door to infinity and that connects us to something greater. And maybe what that is if one is a doctor taking a pause before you see your 10th patient of the day, reminding yourself that that person is made in the image of God. Or a few moments in the morning before your busy day begins, connecting to something, even if you don't believe in God as the grandfather in the sky, maybe just believe the world is interconnected, the goodness of humanity, connecting to that for a few moments. Or instead of giving over all my energy and needs to a relationship for another person, this one time, let me give it to my relationship with the infinite, with my deepest self, because in the end, that's all I have. And of course, if you're not in the habit of giving to that person, give to that person first, because the Torah says you can ask forgiveness to God when you sin against God, but if you ask forgiveness to another person, you have to actually pick up the phone or send a text or a Snapchat. Because when we make that sacrifice and meaning, that brings us closer to that infinite space. And it turns life into a wedding. And what is a wedding? It is a day when love is felt so strongly that it overshadows everything else, and we remember that love is the foundation of life, and that nothing else really matters. It's why we go to weddings. They remind us of that, the power of love. And this is the only love that lasts forever. So the High Holiday is about reminding ourselves that we need to make sacrifices. Nothing else matters, that they're about love and how these love sacrifices make our lives beautiful, to show kindness, to open our hearts for our marriages, for our families, for our people, and ultimately to ultimate purpose. And it's often when the things we love are in danger, that's when we realize how much we really want to do for them, like we have in the past year. Despite all the trouble, so many of us have been strengthened by the sacrifices we've made for the Jewish people. Right before it was easy to be Jewish. It wasn't completely easy, but it was easy enough to be Jewish. But now having to decide, okay, I'm in it, especially for young people, I think has been very powerful. and sacrifice in our duty for God, something beyond all the other sacrifices. Because when the ancients, when they brought their sacrifice, they didn't know how it would affect everything. They had a more tangible idea of God than we do, but they still didn't know. They saw the smoke rise up on the altar, and they had to have faith that it would somehow bring them well-being and peace and all the things they were looking for in their life. And that's the nature of sacrifice. It's invisible. What you get back you can't see, but it's what gives meaning to your life and can fix the very fabric of the universe. And sometimes you need a little bit of drama to be reminded to do more. And so in that story we read tomorrow, Abraham going those 3 days of hell, sacrifice or not sacrifice, what's going to happen? Our tradition says Satan was there the whole time, Satan, whispering in his ear. In the end, he didn't have to sacrifice, but instead he sacrificed a ram, which is why we blow the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And God names that place Adonai Yireh, God will see. Because sacrifice makes a place holy, it makes a home holy, and it makes a person holy. In all the ways we sacrifice our selfishness, our self-centeredness for the needs of others. So today I see a lot of holy people before me. Because this year we have, without second thought, done chesed ve'emet, true kindness, for people in our lives, for our people, and for Israel. In all the myriads of ways we each were called to stand up, and all our myriad diversity of views. And so in my dream there was a wedding, and I wanted to talk about love. And this year the wedding has been hard to see. Between God and the Jewish people, where is it? And yet, as I have been thinking about it, maybe it's easier to see than we think. Because although we can't always feel the love, we can feel is the commitment to each other. Commitment to each other. The love for our fellow Jews and for everyone who's sharing in our families in this path. Stronger than I've seen it. Credible. Even if there are bumps. And understanding that those sacrifices we make, however we each make them, that we seem to be more ready to make than ever before, allows us to stand on the shoulders of those before us with overwhelming pride, with tremendous honor, and with truest loving kindness. Shana Tova. Good Yom Tov.